and welcome to Archaeopolitics, a Harry Potter reread podcast focusing on politics in the wizarding world. I'm Adri, your co-host, recovering English major extraordinaire, and person who just wants to have a normal sleep schedule.
I'm Helene, your co-host, producer, and person who just got a desk. I'm a recent desk owner. I have my podcast station all set up now. It was long overdue, and I'm very excited.
Well, we were talking off mic, Helene, and you made a discovery about your apartment floor. Could you share it with the rest of the class?
Yeah, I'm living at that episode of How I Met Your Mother where their apartment's floors are slanted, I believe, because my chair likes to just, move backwards as soon as I sit down in it. It just moves on its own. So that's great. I'm gonna have to figure out some way to fix that. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, to just stop that movement from
Right.
just taking you away from work. It's just the chair is like, I'm done. We don't want to work anymore.
Yeah, I mean it is a really cheap IKEA chair, so that might have to do with it as well, but who knows?
Affordable, let's just say.
Sure.
But this is not a podcast about chairs and apartments. This is a podcast about Harry Potter. And today, instead of covering one of the chapters of Order of the Phoenix, like we have been so far, we are going to be talking about an aspect of the series that we don't get to talk a lot about on this show. So we have special guest Shoshana, who is a listener, and she reached out to us a few months ago in response to one of our earlier episodes where we talked about how Christianity seems to be central to the Harry Potter series because, Harry celebrates Christmas, and so does everyone else at Hogwarts. And we had such a lovely email exchange that we thought we should bring this conversation online to the podcast. Welcome to the show, Shoshana. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Oh, we're doing well. Helene, I think it's your time to grill our guest.
Yeah, so we like to grill our guests, as Adri put it, on all things Potter, on all things Potter before we, get into the nitty gritty of the discussion here. So, Shoshana, can you tell us how you first got into the series?
Yeah, so actually, I think I've now listened to all of your episodes and I haven't heard someone give this answer before, so this could be interesting. But I've only been into the series for about 5 years. So my now husband got me into it when we first dated. So I did read the earlier books when I was little, up to Goblet of Fire. But then, yeah, we had to wait a little while for Order of the Phoenix to come out, and by the time that came out, I was still 9 years old, and Harry was 15, and I'd committed to other series in the meantime, so I wasn't really into it anymore. But then when I first dated my husband, he was just kind of shocked that I'd never found out how the story ended. He was like, "What? How can you leave it on such a cliffhanger?" And I was like, "Meh, I don't know, I just did." So he got me to watch all the movies, and it was kind of interesting, becoming interested in it as an adult, and I could kind of see other people who also were adults who had grown up with it, and I could see the really positive impact that it had had throughout their lives and how it had really significantly influenced them. And because I'm just someone who loves just the power of storytelling, just as a lifelong lover of stories and an aspiring author, that's what really inspired me is just how influential it had been on people's lives. And then I was just like, okay, I need to actually properly understand how the story works, and that's when I was like, okay, I need to read the books.
That's awesome. Yeah.
It's a you did it for love, and also you found something else in the meantime.
I found something new to love. That's true. Yeah.
Yes.
Love leads to more love, I guess.
This is going to be an interesting question since you found the series, or at least refound the series, and your love for it as an adult. But do you think the series either impacted or changed the way you viewed government or politics?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, again, for me, that was to do with the power of storytelling. So when I was getting back into it, sort of late 2015, early 2016, that was when the Black Hermione headcanon was in the mainstream media a lot because of the casting of Cursed Child. And that was something that, even though I'm not Black, I found that so incredibly powerful, just because to me what it showed was that, a great story that has touched many people could actually evolve over time and could be reclaimed by marginalized fans, and they can use that to empower themselves. At that time, every day, my newsfeed was giving me another article of a Black woman who had found this so empowering, or who was now able to teach her daughter that she's just as magical as the traditionally more represented readers, and I just was loving this so much. And there was another article that came out, I think, around the same time. This was someone who had been, who shared their story, who had kind of grown up in an abusive home, kind of similar to Harry, but without the kind of fairy tale element, I guess you could say, and had had a really difficult childhood. But because he didn't have anyone in real life to kind of teach him values and social skills, he just learned it all from Harry Potter. And that was like, I don't want to be like exploitive. Like, of course, I'm not happy that like that person went through that really difficult time, but I was so happy that they shared that story because just that was just like absolutely mind blowing to me. I think about that all the time. Like if I could choose my legacy in this world to be able to create a story that like really changes someone's life for the better in that way, that was just so incredible to me. So I think for me, although it wasn't in my life at a time when I was kind of forming my ideas of government and things like that, it's kind of what it's taught me about the power of storytelling that's been really powerful.
Oh, I love that. I love
Yeah,
that
that's
so much.
amazing.
Wow. So now that you are fully enmeshed in the Harry Potter fandom, do you have like a house that you most closely identify with, or did you take the quiz on Pottermore, or what house are
I
you?
haven't taken the quiz on Pottermore yet. I think I might take it pretty soon. I'm a bit scared what it's going to tell me actually, because I think that I'm a Ravenclaw who is often missorted as a Hufflepuff. Yeah,
Okay.
I think like so. I think because I do care a lot about fairness and being a good friend and things like that. But I kind of see that as like almost that's kind of like what shows up on the surface. But inside my like inner world, it's really my my like thinking and learning that really kind of defines me. And that is kind of unique to me. Like
Okay.
no one else has the same exact thoughts to me. Actually, my favorite Hogwarts house meme was this one that I found that said, you're a Ravenclaw when the Sorting Hat gets a headache listening to your thoughts." I definitely agree with that.
I love that. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I think I fit the stereotypes of both Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw there.
Well, I will say, as a puff myself, there's nothing wrong being a puff. It's pretty great. But
No,
if
there's
you,
definitely
if
nothing wrong with
but it's good to because it's good to remember the house does take your thoughts and feelings into account. So if you really do feel like you're a Ravenclaw, the house will let you be sorted into Ravenclaw, I believe. So
Oh, thank you.
nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
But do you have someone? Do you have like a Harry Potter character who would be your Wizarding World BFF?
So, as someone who watched the movies first, my first answer is movie Luna. I really related to that character. And actually, like, after I watched the movies, I noticed a lot of people were saying that to me. Just like, oh, do you know Harry Potter? Because you remind me of Luna Lovegood. Um, like, a few people said that. But now that I've read the books, I actually found, like, some elements of Luna were actually a bit different in the books in the way that I found a little bit disappointing. Like, for example, I was sad that the whole scene with the Thestrals, where she kind of helps Harry understand, Voldemort's inner world and what's going on for him, like that never happened. I was kind of disappointed by that, so I'm not sure that I would be book Luna's BFF. I think for Ginny I'd be too boring. I don't think she would like being friends with me, but I'm not so much like a daredevil. But I think book Hermione has is a possibility for like book Hermione is quite a different character as well, I think. But I think she's a really amazing character, and she's really like her emotional intelligence just develops so much through the series, and she's just the moral compass of the group. And she's just an icon.
She's pretty great.
Yeah.
What about the opposite? What do you know who your arch nemesis would be?
I think I left this blank on the questions because I was a little bit torn. I was like, obviously there's characters we all love, hate, and as a I think a Ravenclaw, anyone who kind of twists the educational system for power is a pretty bad person. So it could be Dolores Umbridge. But
Yeah, that's fair.
yeah, I think I was having a thought as well to say if I actually was a Hogwarts student, obviously Gryffindor boys are presented pretty positively throughout the series, but from like the teenage boys that I knew when I was a teenager, if there were like a group of teenage boys who thought that courage and chivalry were the most important things, I can imagine that being a bit of like a whirlpool of toxic masculinity. So I was like, I wasn't sure if like maybe in real life I wouldn't so much like I maybe might avoid Gryffindor house a little bit, but then I was thinking about it. I was like, I don't know, because Adriana's a Gryffindor, and we did, as you said, have a very lovely email exchange and WhatsApp phone call. So maybe I'm wrong, but it's not all Gryffindors, but just especially I think especially like boys in that age category. Yeah.
I feel like there's a difference between like in theory this idea is good, but in practice it may not be. And you've made me think about I completely believe there's a lot of toxic masculinity in Gryffindor, except for Neville, probably. But like, there's, I would think like that, and like that's why probably they kind of butt heads with Slytherins, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, there's also, I guess, a fair amount of toxic masculinity in Slytherin, but it's maybe more of a different kind. I think actually, yeah, when I spoke to you on the phone before, Adriana, we were saying like toxic masculinity shows up different in different cultures. So like, yeah, from a Jewish perspective, maybe it would be more like, oh, rationality should always be prized over emotion, and rationality is a male trait. You can't trust women to be rational, and therefore you shouldn't listen to them. Maybe that's more like what it would look like in Slytherin House. I don't know.
Or just like ambition is better than chivalry, and then they'll fight over it.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, also that. But yeah, so yeah, Neville and like most of the boys in the series aren't actually like that. I can just imagine like, and I am generalizing, but yeah, in real life, teenage boys who have those values, I can imagine many of them might get into those issues, and they're probably like gonna grow out of it when they get older. But yeah,
Well, teenage boys can be the worst.
yeah.
Very, very, very true. Very true. So, if you could change one event or thing in the series, I'm curious, what would you change and why?
Ooh, I was thinking about, yeah, just like as I was kind of reading the books after watching the movies, I kind of realized like, oh, the the movies don't, I know they don't really to me capture the essence of the book so much. I feel like they have like a very different aesthetic and kind of tone. Like the tone of the books is so like whimsical, and like when they go to the Quidditch World Cup, they have all these different tents showing different magical things, and like I think the tents in the movies are just kind of like normal tents. Yeah, the movies don't kind of capture that kind of whimsy. I think that's what I would change about the movie series. I guess the book series, I don't really know, but yeah, maybe it would just be that the scenes with Luna in the movies actually really were canon. Um, and obviously, yeah, some of the things that we're talking about today, like more representation, would obviously be great. That's kind of true of anything that is more than about 5 years old, I think. But yeah, more representation is kind of the obvious, and better representation for what is there is kind of the obvious answer, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's a good. I like that answer a bit, quite a bit. I like that. Well, before we go too deep into our topic for today, we need to take some time to welcome our newest patron, Angelina Nicoli Fiore. Welcome, Angelina. Thank you for becoming a patron. Our patrons keep this show going for you. So if you, like Angelina, would like to keep the show alive and get exclusive content, please head over to patreon.com/aciopolitics.
And okay, so I'm going to do the air horn now because I have to.
Of course.
Now, if you head over to patreon.com/aciopolitics, you can become a patron for $2 a month, and that will give you access to bonus content for every single episode. And $5 a month and $10 a month will get you physical rewards every 3 months. Today's patron exclusive content is a brand new episode of The Girl Who Lived, and we are covering the person we love to hate more than Voldemort, Professor Umbridge. We are going to be talking about the implications of what that one character being gender swapped would mean for the series, or what would happen if the entire cast of characters were gender swapped, focusing on that character. Now, with that being said, let's head over to our in depth discussion of today's topic. Shoshana, tell us a bit about your experience of being Jewish in a Christian centric world.
Great, thank you. And so I kind of grew up in a Jewish environment or a Jewish type of community that is kind of becoming increasingly rare in the UK because, like so many other things, our community is kind of polarizing. So people are either living in the type of community I'm in now, which is a little bit more kind of insular, and like you would kind of only send your children to Jewish schools and things like that, and is more religious, or people are just becoming more kind of completely assimilated into cultural Christianity. But when I was growing up, it was a bit different because I was in Birmingham, which is a big city, like the second or third biggest city in the UK, but had a very small Jewish community. And so I went to the only Jewish primary school in Birmingham, which was King David. And it was a Jewish primary school, but there weren't enough Jewish students to fill the whole school. So we'd do kind of Jewish prayers in the mornings. We had kosher food, things like that. But there were people from all different religions there, which is really great. Actually, that's one of like my favorite things about my upbringing is I've always had a very culturally and religiously diverse group of friends, which I think is a really big privilege. When I was a child, I guess I knew that I was Jewish, and that made me a little bit different, and that it could be dangerous to be Jewish, but also that there are lots of awesome things about it as well. The like cultural Christianity, as in like Christianity being the norm, I was quite sheltered from for those kind of early years, because being a religious minority was very normalized to me. I had lots of Muslim friends at King David, and also, yeah, being Jewish was very normalized. I was just immersed in that Jewish environment pretty much all the time. So things were a bit different when I got to secondary school. There were no Jewish secondary schools in Birmingham, so I just went to just a secular school. And this is where I was kind of more introduced to cultural Christianity for the first time. So again, I was really lucky to have a very diverse group of friends and lots of different belief systems, and that was great. But so at the school, which kind of ostensibly was completely secular, they had what they called a non-denominational Christian ethos, meaning that they had certain Christian practices, but rather than kind of aligning to any particular denomination and being like, yeah, this is what we believe, it was kind of like just presenting Christianity as, these aren't Christian practices, these are just normal practices. This is a completely normal, neutral thing to do. So,
Mhm,
some
mhm, mhm.
examples are we had hymns in the morning, which like now seems kind of laughable to me, that if I think of like my clueless 12-year-old self trying to, like, every time the hymn was announced, trying to quickly find the page before everyone else, so I would have a few seconds to kind of scan through it and be like, oh yeah, this one's just about God, so I can sing it on. Oh no, this one's about Jesus, so I just have to stand doing nothing. That was one thing. Their policy was you couldn't bring in packed lunches, you had to have the school lunches, but I was the only kind of completely kosher observant Jew in the school. There were other Jewish girls there, but they were more kind of, I think in the US you might call it conservative, or like we call it like traditional Orthodox. Like they'd be happy to eat like the vegetarian options. So they know not to eat non-kosher meats, but it didn't matter to them that the food wasn't prepared in a completely kosher environment, if that makes sense. So
Mhm, mhm.
the school would have to bring like special food for me from like the local kosher shop, which I guess was like, it was fine. It was kind of othering, I guess. And then sometimes they would forget, or like the food would be like wet and not defrosted properly, or things like that. I think one of the most difficult things for me was, like my first Christmas at the school. So I was 12, and this is why I decided to email you guys, because you were talking about Christmas at Hogwarts. Basically, the school would really make a big thing of Christmas, and there were some nice traditions that they had, because a lot of people would be very, very excited that it was Christmas. So every year on the last day of term, they'd have this big Christmas lunch. And in my first year there, so I guess the staff weren't really used to remembering to get my kosher food and put it there for me yet. So my first Christmas there, because they were having to do a whole different lunch than normal, they completely forgot to get my kosher food. So I was there with nothing to eat, number one. And then I sat down with my class, and everybody started to sing all these songs. And I was just like, what are these songs? It was assumed that everyone would know them. And like, I remember being surprised actually, because like this had been our first term at the school, and everyone was kind of nervous, and everyone had been extremely welcoming to each other and kind of very good at looking out for the people who might be feeling left out or worried or anything like that. But on this occasion, like, nobody seemed to even notice that I was just completely on the outside of this. Nobody even looked at me and went like, oh, you don't know the songs, like I can help you or something, which is what I would have expected at that class by that point. So yeah, just kind of not knowing the songs, it was just not even noticed that somebody might not know these songs. It was assumed to be completely universal that you would. Not being able to eat the food,
Hmm.
it again was assumed to be completely normal and universal, and this is what you'd eat because it's the end of term and it's Christmas, so why would you eat anything else? And yeah, and not even really understanding, because I don't come from a family that celebrates Christmas, and until that point most of my friends didn't. Like they were Jewish or Muslim, and celebrating Christmas hadn't really been a norm. But I was even sitting at this table not even really sure why people were so excited. I just said, okay, like I guess it's your like it's your holiday, it's the equivalent of like Passover or Rosh Hashanah for me, but just having no idea of the significance of this day. Again, that was assumed to be a completely universal thing that everybody would know about. And yeah, as I got older, there's been other things. I think so Christmas is an interesting one because it plays into the politics of calendars, which I think I was talking about when I was emailing. So if you're culturally Christian, you might think of a calendar as something that's quite objective and static, but actually it's really not at all because many different cultures have completely different calendars, right? So for example, our days don't start at midnight. A Jewish day doesn't start at midnight. It starts when it gets dark. So you might know, our Sabbath is on a Saturday, but a lot of people, some people might not know that actually it starts on Friday, and it starts when it gets dark on Friday. And in the UK, in the winter, it gets dark very early. So when I was in university, it was just quite bad luck. Like every single year in the winter term, I would have lectures at 5 p.m. on a Friday every year without fail.
Oh, wow.
And every year I would have to explain to the lecturer, like, okay, once it gets past this certain week, sometime in October, I'm not going to be able to come to this lecture. And sometimes, I'd be explaining to them from the beginning of the year, like, okay, from this week, from this week in October, I won't be able to come. And then the week before, I tell them, just as a reminder, like, from next week, I won't be able to come. And then, okay, this is my last week coming to this lecture. And then I'd kind of go and, try and get my notes in afterwards. And I'd be like, oh, wait, I thought you were only going to miss one lecture. Like, why didn't you tell me that you're missing all of them? Yeah, it's so normalized that the working day is Monday to Friday. It's kind of almost hard for people who haven't had to understand that there's more than one type of calendar in the world. It's hard to get their head around that someone could be living their life completely differently, and Friday might mean something wildly different to me. And Friday, the hours that count as Friday might not even be the same hours for me as they are for you. So and then there was another. I think this was the same university year actually. When so we also have our High Holy Days in the autumn, which is always a lot of fun because it coincides with the beginning of the school year, and straight away we're on a back foot dipping in and out of school. But so there was one year when I just had a lot of deadlines around the time of the High Holy Days, and so there were 7 working days altogether over a period of 4 weeks when I was not allowed to work at all, and I had to be in the synagogue. Blah, blah, blah. So that was okay, and I said to one of my course leaders, "Can I get an extension on your deadline?" He was like, that's fine, but you have to go through the official, extension policy, blah, blah. So I went to the student support office. I was like, okay, I've had this extension granted, but I have to get it officially approved. And they were saying, no, you can't get an extension for religious observance. Don't take religious observance into account. But I was kind of trying to explain to them, but that may make sense to you, but to me, this day, it just is Rosh Hashanah. Like there's no other, I can't turn it into a working day to be more convenient for you. This is what the day is in my calendar. My calendar doesn't necessarily have to be the same as your calendar. There's more than one way to look at what a day is. And they weren't having it, and it was actually one of my course mates who wasn't Jewish, who pointed out, well, it's kind of hypocritical. They're saying that they don't take religion into account for extenuating circumstances or anything like that, but actually the whole academic calendar is planned around Christianity. So that's, again, an example of Christianity being seen as a default. You'd never have an essay deadline on Christmas Day. In fact, the whole school closes down for a month to make room for Christmas, and the same again for Easter. Right? Yeah, so the politics of calendars, I think, is a very interesting one, living in a Christian-centric world, because the Christian calendar is so extremely normalized that a lot of people think that's the only one. That's the only way to look at what a day is. Whereas if you're not culturally Christian, then you understand that there's more than one way. Kind of going into working life after that, I've kind of had a little bit of drama with some managers trying to get Friday afternoons, trying to be able to finish early on Friday afternoons in the winter. They're normally happy to grant it because they do legally have to. But then sometimes you'll kind of get these comments back, just like, I know, like I've had a situation where I kind of challenged a manager on something that I thought maybe wasn't right, or needed to be challenged, and they kind of came back to me with well, I've been flexible with you about your Friday, so you need to be flexible with me on this. Yeah, so calendar wars kind of continue. I also feel like being someone of a different religion can come across to people as very fascinating to the point where they can't necessarily they can't necessarily see you as a person. They just see you as this blob of Jewishness who can come and teach them about Jewishness. So yeah, there was one time I made the mistake of going to a work party. Just don't go to a work party. You're going to see a manager when there's been alcohol involved, and that can't go well for anyone. But anyway, so it was my manager's manager who came up to me, and he was blind drunk, and I was just a bit like, oh no. But so he started off by telling me that when he was little, he liked going to Israel. And he'd always thought of Israel as a Christian Disneyland, which was great. Good chat. And then he was like, I'm really glad you're here. You help everyone learn. So he was like, yeah, you help everyone learn because, we've never had to think about having someone kosher before, and my secular Jewish colleague was like, oh yeah, she's a little bit kosher, but you're like really kosher. And it helps us think about things that we haven't thought about. I'm also a person. I'm not like a teachable. It's like, it's fine. Like, it's definitely preferable to having a manager who hates your identity, which, early career days probably could happen to me too. But it made me feel like I would always be valued for my otherness and not my actual contribution, I guess. So I think the politics of calendars is a big one, especially around Christmas and Friday nights. The politics of, I guess I might call it like exotification, around treating someone of a non-Christian faith as if they're kind of this fascinating goblet of learning that you can just take from. I think the last one I would want to touch on is the politics of symbolism. And especially, I think the way that we're starting to, the secular world is starting to talk about the Holocaust is becoming very culturally Christian and also a little bit white savior, in the sense that, it's increasingly presented as this kind of satanic force of Nazi Germany versus the noble allies and this great fight between them that the whole world hinges on. Like, that's actually like a very Christian way of looking at it, because in Christianity there's the idea of the devil, who is fundamentally bad and is opposed to God, and it's humans' responsibility to defeat the devil and bring like God back into the world. I guess I'm sounding like I know loads about it. Like, that's obviously better for Christian people to explain rather than me. But but yeah, like in Judaism we don't have an idea of something being fundamentally evil. Like, everything is ultimately controlled by God, except for humans who have the option that we have the free will to choose between the good or bad option. But even then, like, ultimately everything will be for the good.
It's really interesting to hear your take on Christianity and like the view of like good versus evil, and how that the story of the Holocaust is very Christianized in that lens. I mean, I grew up Catholic, which to many Christians is not even Christian. Uh, so, but okay. And I think I find more in when I've visited different churches because my friends have invited me or something, that there's more of a emphasis on the quote unquote devil and hell and sin and all these other things in those churches and in the ideology of those churches. Like, we must guard ourselves against the enemy type language than in Catholicism. And I wonder if that's because Catholicism really heavily borrowed a lot from Judaism.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, yeah, I learned a little bit about like the history of Christianity in school, but obviously, like, I don't know loads about it. You probably know a lot more. But yeah, I think like when I was learning about like the Catholics versus Protestants and like that period of history, I kind of got the sense that like like Catholicism had kind of grown to be its own completely like separate culture, like especially in Europe, that had got quite far from Judaism. And then more like the Protestants came back and looked at what, like, the teachings of Jesus, and like there was kind of like a back to first principles mentality. Jesus obviously was Jewish, so when I was looking at like my 13-year-old history textbook bullet points about Catholics versus Protestants, like, I was like, to me, I was noticing that the Protestants seemed more Jewishish. And then one of my Quaker friends said to me, like, oh, that's because they were looking at what Jesus said and Jesus was Jewish. But I don't know. I don't really know. There's probably like a lot of overlap, I guess, and like ultimately yeah, like they are drawing like all
Well,
three like
so part of Catholic school was also like learning about other religions, like I'm sure you did too, and like you're saying. And one of the things, like the main thing that separates, well, the big thing that separates Catholicism from Protestants are, the ideas around which scripture to follow, and also the idea of divorce as being sanctioned or not. So Protestants, like, the idea of divorce is totally fine. You can remarry in the church. Catholicism, hell no. You have, like, this is the person, and unless they're dead, you can't remarry type thing. And that's where like that rift grew. But also, in Catholicism, you look at scriptures as like quote unquote Old Testament and New Testament together. But in Protestantism, you look just at like the 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 stuff about Jesus, which is in the New Testament. So yeah, so it's more focused, like as you said, it's focused just on Jesus, and what he did, and his teachings. And then Catholicism looks at the whole of it. And a lot of the rituals and ceremonies in Catholicism, because it's highly ritualistic, have been modified and or borrowed, colonized, however, from Judaism.
right. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I guess like was it like in the Catholic Church you'd have like bread and wine, is it after
Yes.
praying?
So communion,
Yeah,
correct. Yes.
right. Yeah, so we have after our we had it today actually because it's Saturday, but yeah, so after our like morning synagogue service on Saturday we'd have kiddush, which is wine, and then hamotzi, which is bread. So yeah, I guess like as you say, there's a lot of like overlap and rituals, I guess.
I always viewed the Kiddush and Hamotzi as kind of like a precursor, something that needed to happen before you could go to the Oneg and eat and drink, because you have to pray and thank God for your wine and bread before you can go and eat
Mhm.
more.
Yeah.
That's how I always felt about it.
Yeah, definitely.
At least as a kid growing up, with
I mean, most things in Judaism are precursor so you can eat more, but yeah,
yeah, exactly.
that kind of goes without saying, right?
Right. My experiences growing up there are definitely some similarities and some differences. If the listeners don't know, I grew up in a very small town in Iowa with two clergy members as parents. So my dad is a rabbi, my mom is a cantor, and they met in rabbinical school, one of the first rabbi cantor intermarriages to happen. So I grew up very, very like ensconced in kind of the very specific small town Iowa Reform Judaism like community. But also we were also Reformed, so that definitely played into the fact that we only have services Friday night and Sunday school on Sunday, and then Hebrew school on Wednesday. We didn't do like Saturday morning services. We don't keep strict kosher. A lot of differences in those kinds of experiences. But the fact that it was a small town, it definitely was interesting. I was definitely more fully immersed in the fact that Christianity was just literally everywhere, and I couldn't avoid it anywhere. There were no Jewish schools. I had no like Jewish primary or secondary school options. It was all public secular schools. And when I did go to public school, I was usually either the only Jew or like one of two in the entire school. So I definitely very much identify with when you talk about people like viewing you as like this fascinating blob of Jewishness who can just teach them about being Jewish, because that was literally my entire like life, and it still kind of is. Like I remember every single year around Hanukkah, my teacher would always ask me to teach the class how to play dreidel. I don't know why. Dreidel is not that interesting. It's
Dreidel
like a
is fun
stupid
when you have
little
chocolate, but
yes,
yeah.
with gelt and everything. But it's like, okay, but why dreidel? Because it has absolutely nothing to really do with the reasons behind Hanukkah or like why we celebrate Hanukkah. It's just a thing we do at Hanukkah. Like
And Hanukkah's not even the most important holiday.
exactly, but to them, I mean,
Like people assume because of its proximity. Yeah.
yes. So Christmas is like the most important holiday to most, at least casual practicing Christians, people who, you know, are just Christmas, Easter, go to church on Christmas and Easter, and that's
I
it.
mean, I would have to jump in here and say that Christmas is the most important holiday for those of for those I wouldn't say of us, but those people who um do like cultural Christianity,
Yes,
as I would say,
that's what I was
right?
trying to say.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I couldn't think of the term.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, no, it's fine. I just wanted to kind of like just in
Yes.
case. But if you are truly Christian, and or Catholic, because obviously, apparently, there's a distinction. Easter should be the focus of your of. I mean, even just like Holy Week and Lent and all of that should be like
Yeah.
those 40 days, and then Holy Week, that should be the focus because it's like a period of contemplation and self-sacrifice. And then, you go through Holy Week and the stages of the cross and all that stuff to like resurrection and like hope and rebirth, all that good stuff about, stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah, so because culturally Christian people are the majority in America, at least, most people who live in America identify as Christian but are really culturally Christian. At least I don't know have the numbers on this, but this is like basically what I think to be fact. And because those types of culturally Christian practicers believe that Christmas is the most important holiday of the year, which is why like we literally get, you know, weeks off and there's nothing is open on Christmas, all of that fun stuff. Because
Thanks, Coca-Cola.
yeah, because Hanukkah is always usually you know around you know either 2 weeks before or like a week after. It's always around that time. People are like, oh well, Christmas is the most important holiday. Hanukkah must be your most important holiday. And then
Yeah.
we're like, oh no, actually, it's more Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. It's the High Holy Days, and they're like, what's that? You know. So the calendar wars growing up, definitely the calendar wars like were a huge problem. I know, like, as I've become less practicing the fact that I don't belong to a synagogue here in Minneapolis, I don't go to services on a regular basis, and I really only practice when I'm home visiting my family. But growing up, obviously, it was 100% expected of me by both my parents to attend every single service, go to Sunday school every single week, go to Hebrew school, do all of it. I, you know, go to Rosh Hashanah, go to Yom Kippur services, miss school if I have to. And
Mhm.
the teachers never really fully understood because they didn't know what Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur were. And they're like, I don't understand why you have to miss school because, I mean, if it was important, I would have heard about it, right? Um,
Yeah.
those types of
Ugh,
things.
like insert deep groan.
Exactly. And then, yeah, a lot of, and in terms of like the Friday night thing, I definitely always get questions from people where, because growing up, I'd be like, oh, I can't hang out on Friday nights. I have to go to services. And they're like, what do you mean on Friday night? I thought your Sabbath was on Saturday. Why don't you go to service on
Right.
Saturday? And it's like, because all of our holidays start at sundown the night before the day,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
they're like, so it's like, oh, the first day of Hanukkah is tomorrow, but you're celebrating it the night before. I don't understand why. It's like no one ever understands.
Yeah.
But thankfully, it hasn't been an actual like impediment on my life. Like it seems like you have definitely had issues with having to get out of things early to go on a Friday. And unfortunately for me, that hasn't been much of an issue. But I can definitely like sympathize with that experience.
Yeah, and I think something, yeah, like not being able to get that extension on that essay, like probably did make a difference to like the outcome of my degree. But yeah, I think when you were saying before, like being treated as a blob of otherness, it just reminded me again. It's like, but there's kind of a filter of otherness that people see you through all the time. So like, it's reminding me of like another story when I was in high school, and I decided to teach one of my best friends a secret language that I had with my brother and sister. And so I taught her how you speak this language, and then we thought it'd be funny to go and annoy our other friends by speaking this language to them, and they wouldn't understand us, so we thought that'd be funny. So we went and found some of our other friends, and we started speaking in this like nonsense, and they looked at us confused for a second, and then they said like, oh no, one of them said like, oh, you're speaking Jewish, and
Oh my
the
gosh.
the other one replied to her like, you can't speak Jewish, you know, you can't speak Christian. And that was just like looking back. It was quite like an interesting, like it was just a funny moment for me at the time. It didn't massively bother me, but yeah, it was just like quite a telling thing. Like first of all, like the first friend who was like, "Oh, you're speaking Jewish," like she obviously kind of had this filter that just like, okay, this person is other, and if I squint hard enough, any weird thing about her will fit into this otherness filter that I've got, and will explain absolutely anything, even the fact she's just speaking words that aren't words, because it's obviously just a
Yeah.
game. But then, yeah, and then the other person replied, well, you can't speak Christian, so you obviously can't speak Jewish, kind of holding up Christianity as like this standard bearer of what all other religions must be like. If something doesn't exist in Christianity, it can't exist in any other religion. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's another example of being a blob of Jewishness, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And people kind of push things that are just expected in Christianity. They tend to generalize, like, oh, Jews must believe in hell because hell is real because Christians believe in hell, right? And when I tell people,
Right.
Jews, I don't actually like Jews don't actually believe that there is a hell or a devil, and they're like, what? So it's kind of just a big generalization of anything that is normal for a Christian has to just fit into the mold that they have of Judaism in their mind, which is very interesting. And yes, I've
Yeah,
definitely
all other,
like heard
yeah.
had people like say that Hebrew, like call Hebrew Jewish, which is very interesting. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, so the entirety of Israel, where Muslims, Christians, and Jews all coexist, speak Jewish. Okay, good to know.
Yeah. Whereas, like, yeah, this
It's an
idea that like
interesting.
all other religions are kind of a spin-off of Christianity, and like, yeah, they must all be like, yeah, have different manifestations of Christianity within them, and like, no, like some religions are completely different from Christianity.
Some religions predate it.
Right. Yeah, many of them do. Yeah, it's interesting, like, Adriana, when you're saying, like, yeah, like, in Catholicism, like, what I was saying about the Holocaust, and, like, the idea of the Nazis being kind of satanic in a lot of modern presentations, like, yeah, well, that doesn't maybe exist so much in Catholicism, but I think, like, if we talk about cultural Christianity, which I think is more like secular cultural Christianity, which I think is more like what I'm referring to when I say the way the Holocaust is presented, that normally is Protestantism, and like the idea of this force of evil versus the force of good kind of clashing in this great dramatic battle, and who will triumph over who, like that is more culturally Christian, and it's more secular. So it's interesting that follows on from the Protestant tradition more, which does mean there's the concept of like a WASP, like a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, is like how I know, like, you kind of like sometimes like people might describe someone who like is quite sheltered from the idea that there are different cultures, because they get to see their culture as completely normal and universal. This week it was actually Holocaust Memorial Day in I don't know if this is in the US as well or just in the UK, but yeah, it was
Yep.
Holocaust Memorial Day on the
Yep.
27th of January. Yeah, it was for you guys as well.
Yep.
Yeah, and I saw an article that said, oh, it's today because it's the anniversary of the liberation of one of the camps. I just thought that was kind of ironic because it's not really the anniversary, is it? Only if you're Christian. Like, yeah, for us that day would have been a completely different day in the Hebrew calendar. So again, that was kind of the politics of calendars to me, and just like presenting the Christian calendar as completely universal, whereas actually probably to a Jewish person we care more about the Hebrew date of that event, because it's something that kind of affected us more than it affected Christians.
So I had a question, like, so listening to you talk about cultural Christianity, because I have also seen like cultural Christianity in the United States is a little bit different than cultural Christianity elsewhere. At least in Puerto
Mm.
Rico, it was a little bit different. And also, I've been to mass in Puerto Rico like my entire life, obviously, and then I've gone to mass here in the United States. I've noticed there are some cultural differences also. They're
Mm.
slight, but even though it's supposed to be like Roman Catholic, quote unquote, the scriptures are all the same because they're dictated by like Rome. So like you can't, like, every service everywhere in the world on a certain day in the Christian calendar obviously will have the same scriptures. So it's not about the scripture itself necessarily, but more about the culture surrounding how that scripture maybe is interpreted. and seen by the different priests, and also like the culture of the congregation. So I was wondering if there's like a cultural, like if there's a permeability between the the culture, like the outside culture and your experience of your religion, or if it's more separate because it is not, like it hasn't permeated as much.
Okay, so wait, hang on. So is this about a cultural experience of Jewishness or a cultural experience of like cultural Christianity being different?
No, no, no. It's more about how maybe I'm thinking about how my experiences even within the same religion have been different in
Oh,
different cultures. So
yeah.
is is there a point where maybe Judaism is not as permeable to different cultures, or is it influenced by the surrounding culture, your experience of the religion?
Yeah, that's really interesting. No, I definitely think it is different. Because I think like yeah, so I was growing up in this kind of traditional Orthodox community. So I guess like when I say traditional Orthodox, I mean someone who likes to do things the way their ancestors did it. So maybe like they have Friday night dinner with their family because that's always been a big part of their culture. But then after Friday night dinner, they will watch TV, which like if you keep Shabbat fully, like I try to, then you're not supposed to watch TV. Yeah, that would be an example. I feel like yeah, the traditional Orthodox synagogues where I was growing up were very very British. So like I'm trying to think of a good example, but um, to stereotype British people, not there was not a lot of emotion going into the prayers. For example, there'd be like a lot of kind of yeah older men who would kind of shuffle through the prayers and like kind of yeah mumble through them and then kind of say like amen and then like kind of look around like we were kids kind of like glare at us for giggling things like that, just like very stereotypically British things, whereas
Hmm.
now it's interesting because I'm in a more religious community and people more identify as like modern Orthodox, meaning kind of like on the one hand trying to be more like inclusive, and people who might traditionally have been not so accepted in the traditional Orthodox communities, but also kind of becoming more religious and like not just doing things the way they've always been done because that's how it's always been done, but actually looking back to a Jewish text and seeing like what meaning we can get out of this and stuff like that. And I find like yeah, synagogues here. So yeah, I'm in Borehamwood, which is kind of one of the more like up and coming Jewish communities. A lot of people are moving here at the moment because it's commuting distance of London, but without the London house prices. So it's becoming a bigger
Hmm.
Jewish community. And what I'm saying about synagogues here is they are not so influenced by British culture. As people are becoming more religious, they're often influenced by Israeli culture quite a lot. So, for example, I used to go to this one synagogue. This is not here in Borehamwood. This was back when I lived in a religious part of London. So there's one synagogue that used to finish their whole service by about 11:15 on a Saturday morning, and that I think is typical in Israel because like it gets hot and everything. People like to finish early, get back, and have like a super early lunch. And they were doing that, and they had other Israeli traditions, and that synagogue was kind of known for being kind of where people go if they want to move to Israel but they can't afford to yet or they're not at the right stage of life. They'd go to this synagogue, and everyone there really just loved Israel, and that was like one of their main kind of Jewish passions. I personally don't really want to move to Israel. I kind of want to stay in England, but that synagogue was like a 2-minute walk from my house when I lived in London, so that's why I was there. Like yeah, or like alternatively there's also yeah synagogues that kind of maybe do things more how they would have been done back in like in the old country in Eastern Europe, in the shtetl as I like to call it. Well that is what it's called, but I call Borehamwood the shtetl because it's where all the Jewish people are. So like yeah, people doing prayers more like how they would have been done in the actual shtetl, and yeah with just a lot more kind of Yiddish influences. Yeah, even like you can see people in kind of old style like Polish clothing because they're kind of connecting to what their ancestors would have worn before they were made to kind of flee the country and stuff like that. So yeah, I think like yeah, I can see in some communities very British influences, whereas people maybe trying to connect more to like their older Jewish roots. Yeah, you might see Israeli or Eastern European influences, which can be very different.
Helene, what about you? Have you noticed any like American cultural influences in your experience?
I can't really speak as much to it because so growing up with two clergy members as parents, I like refuse to go to any synagogue where my parents aren't leading the service because it's just too weird. So that's like a big because I don't know what I grew up with very used to every single Friday night. My dad would lead the service, and my mom would lead the singing, the prayers and song. And anytime I ever had to go to any other synagogue where they weren't leading it, I didn't like it. It was just weird for me, and it's just like I was like, no, thank you, I don't like it the way that anybody else does it. And so I that's a big reason why I haven't gone to any other synagogues since I moved here, because I just know I'm going to be uncomfortable under a rabbi that is not my father. And I think that it's kind of a weird thing, because I don't think a lot of daughters and sons, children? Why can't I think of words? I don't think a lot of children of clergy members, of rabbis, they probably don't feel the same. I mean, I'm sure that other people feel fine going to other synagogues, but I just have like this weird thing. So the only other places that I've really gone to services outside of just where I grew up are I went to a Jewish summer camp every single summer for 9 years. It's called Azrui. It's in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, and we would all like definitely pray and do services on Fridays and Saturdays and all that stuff. And I always had a different rabbi. I didn't really like it, but I didn't notice any cultural differences from the different rabbis I had during camp, and that would be like people from all over the country. So I didn't notice anything at all. And then I also obviously have been to Israel multiple times and gone to services there, but that was just a huge difference to me, just because they are much more traditional and I would say just overall more religious there than my community. So I didn't really think that was more of I didn't think that of that as a cultural difference as much as I thought of it as just like a traditional difference, because we are definitely a lot more lax and not as traditional as a conservative or an Orthodox Jew might be. So it's just very different in that regard. But that also can be said in America without having to leave and go to Israel as well. Like
Yeah.
attending an Orthodox service is going to be very different than attending a Reformed Jewish service. So
So, one of my, best friends from childhood, she is a pastor, and she went to Princeton Divinity School. Smartest person I know. And she goes to different services, like Christian services, to kind of see what other people are doing. And I'm sure that's weird for her as well in a way, but she sees it more as like an intellectual exercise. And we took her to the service in El Paso that my husband's parents go to. And it was interesting service because there was a lot of like anti-Muslim sentiment in the
oh great,
and
Don't
into
want that.
the sermon.
wow.
And I was just like sitting there super awkwardly thinking, like, is this Fox News, right?
Oh no.
Like it really read like that. So I know, I mean, probably because there's such a cultural tie to Christianity in like the mainstream in the United States, and it sounds like also the UK, there's more permeability between the outside world, quote unquote, and like the church world than there might be with other religions that are not thought of as the quote unquote norm, I think. So that's why I was just wondering also.
Yeah, I guess the church is part of like the institution of the country, isn't it? Like yeah, people talk about the
Yeah.
separation between church and state, but like the fact that there is a separation to be made in the first place kind of shows that they're never going to be entirely separate.
Don't get me started about like prayer on schools. Like prayer in schools, like come on guys. No.
I don't know.
Can
I
we
almost feel
just
like prayer
not?
in school is like the least of our worries in a way. Like if you think of it now with the pandemic, for example, like yeah, I think I had to listen to my first kind of hand wringing "what are we going to do about Christmas" conversation in about September. Whereas obviously, yeah, the lockdown in this country was about 2 weeks before, maybe even like a week before Passover, which caused a whole lot of panic because Passover is actually a lot of work, and many people, like my husband and me, we'd never made our own Passover before. We've always gone to family, and suddenly a week out, we're being told like, nope, you're going to have to do everything. And that wasn't even mentioned in the mainstream media until after the fact. Whereas from like, yeah, the autumn, pretty much like people in power were saying like, oh, don't worry, we're going to make sure you have Christmas, and like I think it was Eid as well, the day after the lockdown started or something like that. So like a lot of like Muslim and Jewish people were like kind of folding our arms, going like, "Well, you didn't do this for us." So yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
like yeah, what I have seen is like a lot of the time in kosher shops, for example, especially where you see kind of ultra orthodox people in those kinds of shops, like there hasn't been as much social distancing. And this is something I want to be very careful about the way that I'm saying it, because I'm seeing like articles coming out at the moment which are, which definitely have a flavor of anti-Semitism to them, going, what are we going to do about these Orthodox Jews? And they call them Orthodox Jews, not ultra-Orthodox, which is already not right because I'm an Orthodox Jew, but my life is nothing like those people's lives. But yeah, what are we going to do about these Orthodox Jews? They're not keeping social distancing. How can we make them do it? And I'm kind of like, but you don't get it. Like, they don't feel like you're talking to them. Like, these people are trying their best to like not make any changes from these laws that are written down 3,000 years ago. And if they're Haredi, that's that's their full-time job, is to understand and practice these laws. That's what they do all through school and all through their working life. All they see is just the government again for the bazillionth time by now saying to Jews that you can't practice Judaism in the way that you want to, and that we're going to put restrictions on that. And of course they resist it, but the way the narrative has come from the government it just does seem to be quite focused on the people that the government thinks of as the norm in this country. And I don't as an example, the fact that they didn't mention that Passover was a week away or the Eid was the next day when they announced the lockdown, but then meanwhile they're talking about Christmas 3 months out. Like, I don't really blame someone who's a religious minority who is like extremely immersed in their religion, who doesn't really watch the secular news or anything. I don't really blame them for not feeling like the government's talking to them in that, like, in this kind of situation. Like, I can see prayer in schools as like, is a problem for some people. I know maybe these like say more where it's a problem for you. Like, to me it's not a massive problem, but it's more when you have people who just seem to be completely off the radar of the government, and you have a situation like we have now, and the government finds it really hard to reach out to those people because they don't see those people as the norm. They don't know how to communicate with them.
Well, I feel like when I said like prayer in schools, I meant like kind of specifically what you just very eloquently said. It is like a symptom of like something that is taken as the norm and as something that is completely normal, or like saying in our currency, in God we trust, right? As
Mm.
making it so entrenched into the culture that it gives you no room to be anything other than Christian, to be the
So
norm.
I have an anecdote from this in this specific realm, because growing up, I loved being in choir, but in high school I actually had to quit choir because they insisted on singing Christian songs about Jesus like year round. And
Mm.
I remember, like, we politely asked them to stop, and we're like, this is a public school where there are Jews, Muslims, atheists,
Mhm.
all different types of religions, and this choir, like, it is not just for Christians, and we shouldn't be singing songs about loving Jesus if it doesn't make you feel good or doesn't make you feel comfortable. And they refused to stop, and my father brought it to the school district and tried to get them to pass some sort of legislation from the top so that it was not even possible for them to make us sing these types of songs, and we lost. So I had to quit one of my favorite activities in school because it was either that or be forced to sing songs about Jesus, which I did not feel comfortable with. So it's definitely, and this is crazy because it's just a public school, right? And there's a difference. There's separation of church and state for a reason, and people who are culturally Christian kind of take those things for granted, and just assume we're going to have a Christmas concert, or in band we're going to play Jingle Bells for our like around the end of the year, or you know we
Mhm.
everybody believes that the Easter bunny is real, and we're going to talk about that in school or whatever, just things like that. So it's definitely, I don't think it's as obvious as like making people literally like pray in school every single day, but it kind of shows up in these small ways where a lot of us who disagree or don't want to partake kind of don't have a choice and have to find ourselves sacrificing something to make ourselves feel more comfortable because people are not going to accommodate or change for us. We have to do it for them.
Yeah, no, I'm really sorry that happened to you about the choir. That really sucks. Yeah, I guess maybe like, yeah, maybe it is a problem. I guess I just like in my mind I was saying like, oh no, it's not a problem. I used to enjoy doing the hymns at school, but I just had to always check in advance if it was going to be a Jesus one in those like few seconds of everyone's finding the page. But yeah, I guess it's a different story if like it's taking away something that you enjoy, if it's like a voluntary activity, but you can't get them to stop doing Jesus songs. Or I guess also if like, yeah, it depends if people are like punished for not taking part, because like everyone in my school
Yeah.
knew like, yeah, that like, yeah, girls who are not Christian are not going to sing the songs that are about Jesus, and like that was kind of fine. But then like, so actually this happened to my sister after I'd left the school, but yeah, they said like not enough people are joining in with the hymns anymore, not because I don't think they're a different religion, but just because like it become a culture in the school to just be a bit more embarrassed about singing the hymns, and people didn't want to do it anymore. So they were like, okay, we're going to give you like, so we used to get these stickers that were called merits. You get a merit sticker for various things. So that, okay, from now on, everyone's going to get a merit if they sing the hymn. But the teachers can't keep track of every single person and whether they're singing the hymn or not. So they just relied on honesty. And after like after the morning assembly every single day, the teacher was like going around the class asking everyone, "Did you sing the hymn? Did you sing the hymn?" And then she got to my sister, and my sister was like, "No, I didn't sing it." And the teacher was like, "Well, why not?" And she was like, "Well, it was about Jesus." And then she was like, "Oh, okay," and walked away. Then she was like, "No, wait," and she went back to my sister again, and she was like, "I'm gonna have to give you a merit because I can't do discrimination." But yeah,
Wow.
and then yeah, my sister was saying like she wasn't so happy with that situation because like, I know she was about 13 years old, and it's not very fun when you're that age to have to always explain why you're different again. So yeah, I think she was just kind of like, okay, just better if they just don't do any rewards or punishments for partaking in prayer, because people of different religions or no religion are just like that's not really a good thing. But yeah, so yeah, I guess it maybe it depends. I don't know if you agree, but like, yeah, to me it kind of depends on, yeah, whether there's any rewards or punishments associated, or whether it's kind of like it's presented as what the school is doing, but it's also essentially optional. I don't know.
So we were talking earlier about anti-Semitism and how it shows in insidious and subtle ways in your cultural experiences for both of you, and how Christianity is the center. Now, many critical scholars say that the Harry Potter series has traces of insidious and also subtle anti-Semitism, and it borrows from anti-Semitic tropes used in Shakespeare and other works of literature. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the goblins are Jewish people. um, I used to kind of try and make excuses for this and just be like, oh yeah, like the goblins do have anti-Semitic tropes, but she probably didn't realize, and she was probably just copying from other, other mythology, and she didn't know that she was copying and pasting these anti-Semitic tropes. Actually, after reading the books, like, yeah, they're Jewish people. There's very little getting away from it. Yeah, they have like, she goes into kind of the history of, like, yeah, being marginalized and having uprisings, and yeah, being massacred sometimes, and not being allowed to use wands and stuff like that. Like, to me, it does ring very true with Jewish history. Yeah, and unfortunately, they're all heartless bankers. I was just reading the bit in Deathly Hallows where Bill is trying to explain to Harry about, like goblin human friendships, and he was like, oh, like I'm aware of these goblins. Like, we kind of respect each other to a degree. It's not really possible for our two races to be friends. It's like, I know this wasn't written in 2021, but I'm kind of just like, why would you even write two races that can't be friends? Like, how does anyone expect that to go well? Like, at least just don't call it a race if you're going to argue that they have these traits that are just like an immutable part of their whatever, like, of who they are, and that means they can't be friends with humans. Like, how did you expect that to go well? Yeah, I think it's in that same part as well that Harry, like, or the narrator, I guess, is finding lots of things that he doesn't like about Agrippa the Goblin, And Grip Hook is refusing to eat the same food as everyone else. Which, as I said, as someone who was the only kosher observant Jew in the school, that kind of had a bit of a sting to it, I guess. Because like he's almost demonized, and it's presented as, oh, he refused to eat this food, he insisted on having this food again, he grudgingly came to the table with everyone else. And I don't really know what was meant by that, I guess. It's interesting, the physical appearance of the goblins. So they have beards, which I guess is something that like rabbis, like Orthodox Jews, are associated with. Short, they have black eyes. These are also stereotypes. But and also something that I noticed is that sometimes it refers to in the Deathly Hallows, sometimes it refers to him as Grip Hook, but if it's saying something that we don't like about him, it refers to him in the in the text as the Goblin, which kind of reminded me a little bit of Dickens. So I'm quite a Dickens fan. I do enjoy some of those books, but I think he was definitely like a net good for social justice in his day. But something, if you look at, for example, Oliver Twist, great book, but like extremely anti-Semitic through the character of Fagin. And every time, sometimes Dickens will refer to Fagin in the text as Fagin, but whenever he goes into like a really dehumanizing anti-Semitic tirade against him, he'll just refer to him as the Jew. So that whole thing about the goblin, that had like that ring to it as well, I think. So I don't know what she was trying to achieve. Like, I don't. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't actually believe that like J.K. Rowling is like a complete like. There are people who literally want all the Jewish people dead. And they're still around. Some people think that they're not still around. They definitely are. Almost like some of this text actually reads like almost as if J.K. Rowling was one of them, but I actually really don't think that she is, because there was one time that I was genuinely like, I know, I do understand all the criticisms with the things that she's published, sadly, in recent months, and we are all very sad about that. I really do wish she would change her mind about that. But just on the anti-Semitism thing, there was one time that that I was actually genuinely very grateful to her, which was in 2014. And I don't want to go too much into the background of it because I don't want to spread misinformation, and which is very easy to do on this topic. But basically, I'm just going to say there was a very sad situation happening in the Middle East, and Israel was involved. And the situation was being used in a few different European countries to completely normalize anti-Semitism. Every day I'd be hearing more stories about about people getting in France, especially, I think, getting chased down the street with meat cleavers for being Jewish. And I went to like a supermarket in Birmingham where there used to be a kosher section, and the kosher section was just gone. Like they just didn't have food for us. And I was like, what's going on? And then I found out later from someone in the community that they'd taken the kosher products away because customers were throwing them at staff. So it was really being normalized to literally just hate Jewish people for existing. And so this time I saw something online that was a lot of academics and a lot of celebrities, I think all from the UK, had this had started this, like, that all signed this pledge to culturally boycott Israel. Meaning, so remember, we're talking about the only Jewish country in the world, right? And yes, so they're not going to accept any kind of academia or art or science or anything like that from anybody who is Israeli. So basically, when you've got the only Jewish country in the world and you're not going to let any of them speak about anything because of what the government is doing, that's basically as close as you can get to saying you have a problem with Jewish people before you do anything illegal. Right? Yeah, and they also had some quotes from celebrities who had been asked to join the agreement and who had refused. And one of them was J.K. Rowling, and she said that, I didn't look up the exact wording, but she said that basically, if you want to find out about kind of dissent against what a government is doing, the first people you should listen to rather than boycott is the people living under that government. And I thought actually that was an insightful point. Why, normally if you look at the culture coming out of a country, let's say the country is like relatively right wing, like you normally can't actually tell. Like the people under the more right wing governments will often produce the more kind of socialist art, right? Yes, I thought actually that was an insightful point. And just from that, I actually don't think that she's like deliberately an anti-Semite. but I don't know what the goblins are there for or why they're presented this way.
Yeah, I don't know. It wasn't as like super obvious hit me in the face type of thing that I noticed, especially when I was reading and through and watching through for the first time, because I just assumed that there was a lot of lore and fantasy background on goblins that I just didn't know, and I just like, oh, this must just be like goblins. I don't know. I didn't make the connection that it could be related to anti-Semitism or Jewish people at all. But as I've grown older and I've kind of been able to look at the series through different lenses, I can definitely see like they seem to be very greedy. They are the ones put in charge of the money. Wizards, quote unquote, trust them with their money, but also don't give them the same rights as wizards, which is kind of, I don't know. It speaks to a different narrative, kind of, that you're good enough to handle our money, but you're not good enough to like be respected on the same level as us. And those types of things I can definitely see a parallel between, but I still don't think it's super obvious, and I do think it was mostly unintentional on behalf of the author,
I don't know.
and she probably just found all this lore.
Yeah, that is what I thought. I thought like because like as far as I understand it, she didn't really invent any of her own magical creatures until the later books. So like the goblins,
Yeah.
they're first introduced in Philosopher's Stone, right? Actually, I think one of the first magical creatures that we meet. And yeah, I kind of thought, oh, but they've just been copied and pasted over.
Mm-hmm.
Along with all the tropes, nowadays there's certain things about the goblins that to me I find it hard to deny. There's the fact that they have their own lore, and it's about property and stuff like that. I just like, yeah, when I was reading this, I
Mm-hmm.
just felt like this is supposed to be about the Torah. You can't trust these goblins because they have a different moral code. They don't follow our moral codes. Like this seems like a Christian centric view of like.
Yeah, and they also speak. I believe they literally call the language that the goblins speak
Gobbledygook.
gobbledygook.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they speak a different language, and definitely could be seen as Hebrew as well. So I don't know. I think she kind of found lore regarding goblins and just used it. And I have seen before, when I used to follow her on Twitter, which I do not
Mm-hmm.
anymore. I used to see her take a lot of stances against anti-Semitism. So I don't believe she's an anti-Semite, or at least not anymore. Maybe when she was first writing the book, she had latent anti-Semitism that hadn't been addressed, and now she's kind of maybe like called it out and changed that about herself. But yeah, I don't think it was malicious in intent at the beginning.
Yeah, I don't know. I have one more piece of evidence for this debate actually, which is just Elastic. So this is actually, it might be soon for you guys. I'm not sure because it's in the Order of the Phoenix, and it's when Hermione's getting the Daily Prophet. And there's like obviously the Daily Prophet has kind of been taken over by the Death Eaters, and there was someone who had denounced the actions of the Ministry interfering at Hogwarts, and then the Daily Prophet commented underneath like, oh, this person who denounced the Ministry, like you can't really trust her. There's like this theory that she is that she's part of this Goblin conspiracy. And I was kind of like, you can't use your own anti-Semitic trope to make a comment on media anti-Semitism. That was kind of ironic to me, but just like the whole thing about the Goblin conspiracy, and you can't trust what she says because she's part of the Goblin conspiracy. But I agree with you, like even though we don't follow her on Twitter anymore, like she has spoken up about anti-Semitism online, and especially that one time in 2014 that really did kind of mean something to me.
I think what ends up happening a lot too is that you don't necessarily know all the things that you've absorbed culturally until they're pointed out to you.
Yes.
So perhaps she did not think of herself as an anti-Semite and didn't adhere to those beliefs, but like she had absorbed, like many of us absorb racist bias through our culture, and unless they're pointed out to us, we don't quite understand what people are talking about.
That's true. Yeah, that could be it.
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm really glad to have had this conversation about that. The one thing that I want to make sure that we cover is religious practices in the series. So, like, we've talked about both of yours religious experience. I've kind of jumped in with bits of my own, but in Harry Potter, I don't think we can see anyone talking about any religious practice, but they do celebrate Christmas rather than a pagan holiday. So does that mean that we think that Christianity is also the default in the wizarding world, or that it's a that Christmas is a secular holiday now because it's commercialized? Like, what are our thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely think that Christianity is presented as the default, absolutely, in the wizarding world, in a way that I think maybe J.K. Rowling doesn't even really know she's doing it. So aside from Christmas, we've also got all the Godfather drama. As far as what I was taught in school, the Godfather is kind of, or the godparent is kind of named as part of the baptism ceremony. That's like, I mean, maybe people from other religions are starting to use that concept now, but as far as I know, traditionally, it has been a Christian concept. There's the fact that, yeah, the Hogsmeade Day is Saturday. Presumably, Hogsmeade is on Saturday because all the Hogsmeade shops are going to be closed on Sunday, as most shops are in the UK. Like in the Jewish community, like our shops are open on Sunday and closed on Saturday, but maybe that's not even taken into account as a possibility. But interestingly, it's a very secularized Christianity because although, they don't go to Hogsmeade on Sundays, they can only go on Saturdays. My copy of Harry Potter has actually a map of the Hogwarts campus, and there's no chapel in Hogwarts. If anyone actually wanted to, keep the Christian Sabbath fully, I believe you would need a chapel or a church of some kind, right? They don't have that option, but they still kind of have it, yeah, in their minds that, yeah, that Sunday is somehow like a quieter kind of day. There's Bill and Fleur's wedding. That one really annoyed me because I was kind of like, actually, it would have been really cool to see some wizarding wedding traditions and hear about how those traditions got started. Like, I would love to know that, but it just
Yeah.
follows the format of a Christian wedding because it's almost like, yeah, the author and the editors and everyone can't see past their bias, that that's how all weddings work. I'm married. I've never said I do. It's not how it works. In the Deathly Hallows, they find the grave of the Potters, and yeah, it says that like that this is where many wizarding families are buried, and guess where the graveyard is? A church, because all wizards are Christian and buried in a church graveyard. But yeah, I think, yeah, the worst one to me is because the book does, yeah, the books do kind of play a lot into Holocaust imagery, I think, and there's a lot of parallels, which I'm pretty sure must have been deliberate. I don't see how they could not have been deliberate, with the persecution of the Muggleborns, and first, like, the government is taken over by people who don't want the Muggleborns to be there, and their rights start to get taken away one by one. There's propaganda going on in the education system, and then they all have to register their names, and they go into hiding, and they're going to be sent to Azkaban, which most people don't survive, I think Ron says. Like, yeah, it's very, very clear parallels, but it's all kind of from the point of view of Harry as, as a privileged, half-blood. He's not Muggle-born. Most of the members of the Order of the Phoenix, which is how we get most of our information about what's going on in this, in this time of persecution. Most of them are not Muggle-born. The way the imagery is portrayed is that it is this satanic force of Voldemort who must be overcome by a good force. Which is quite a Christian way of seeing it, I think. And it's to me kind of a shame that we don't get much sense of whether Muggleborns actually have, their own kind of Muggleborn communities, and whether they have their own take on the persecution that's happening to them, and whether they have their own specifically Muggle-born ways of resisting, in the same way that, the Jewish resistance that took place at the time probably would have been more clearly, culturally Jewish, rather than the way the Allies chose to fight the Nazis, which was culturally Christian. I have a couple more kind of thoughts on it. One of them is that it's actually ironic, I think, that Christianity even is presented as a default in the series, because the threat of Christian violence really hangs over these characters. And by that, I'm not saying at all that Christianity or all Christians are violent. Lots of people's Christianity kind of inspires them to become pacifists and other kind of anti-violent things. But what I guess I'm kind of saying is that historically, people who have used Christianity to maintain power have been responsible for, I guess, an impressive proportion of the world's violence. And if you think about the Statute of Secrecy, it is like, I think Hagrid kind of brushes it off in the Philosopher's Stone as like, oh, we have to keep ourselves secret because otherwise Muggles would want us to do everything. To me, that doesn't really ring true. I think if you just observe the fear that the characters seem to face when there's any suggestion that the statute of secrecy might be breached. To me, as someone from a minority religion, it reads as a security measure. It's the same as when we have a Jewish event, there's some kind of security measure that stops people with the wrong intentions finding out the location of the event. There's some kind of security on the door. There's a real sense that, we can't let just anyone find out that we're here doing a Jewish thing, because for some people that would be enough of a reason for them to kill us. And it's the same with wizards. And if you look at when the statute of secrecy was passed, it was around the time of the Salem witch trials, that kind of late 17th century kind of period. So to me, that was pretty close. I don't know if that parallel was on purpose, but that's kind of how it read to me, was that it was a time when not all Christians, but the Christian power structure were kind of, I guess, becoming increasingly violent towards people that they had labeled as witches. Or if you look at it from the point of view of the series where witches are real, then they were persecuting people who identified that way, and that's where a lot of their culture kind of comes from. But that almost seems to be kind of over the heads of the creators of the series, because they continue to kind of say like, oh, but it was all muggles who persecuted witches, glossing over the fact that actually that was mainly the Christian power structure.
Yeah, I kind of see the series as kind of a victim of two things. One, cultural Christianity being the norm. It's just easier for her to write these things this way because that's what everybody knows and is used to, and majority of the population is probably going to just understand Christmas, so she'll just talk about Christmas.
And it's how the UK school system is set up as well, is that the holidays are Christmas, Easter, and summer.
Exactly. Yeah. And the other thing I think it falls victim to is honestly the author's laziness. She easily could have shown other things, and I feel like maybe she just didn't even feel like she wanted to take the effort to do that, and was just like, I'll just do it this way through the lens of a Christian because that's what I know and that's what everybody I know knows, and whatever, this is easier. I am kind of interested though to see if we get to see any other any other religious wizarding experiences in the Fantastic Beasts series as that moves on, because Tina and Queenie, I always do that wrong. Tina and Queenie are thought to be Jewish because their last name is Goldstein and they live in New York. So I do believe that there's a possibility that maybe sometime in the future, maybe we'll get to see some wizards celebrate Hanukkah, or celebrate a High Holy Day,
can it
or
please
something
not be
like
Hanukkah,
that.
just like anything else?
Well, I mean, culture, to make their Jewish narrative fit in the cultural Christianity box, it probably will be Hanukkah, just because when do you ever see the High Holy Days depicted in media? You don't. I mean, you see people lighting a menorah in the window, and you don't ever see people going to synagogue on a High Holy Day and talking about fasting or anything like that. So
you do, Mrs.
I would be
Maisel.
interested to see if that does ever happen. Oh, and Mrs. Maisel, yes, of course, yes, definitely. But what was I going to say? Oh yeah, so that as far as I know, there's only one, not even 100% confirmed Jewish student at Hogwarts.
Oh, Anthony Goldstein.
Yeah, and we don't know anything about his experience, what he does during the Christmas time, if he has any other traditions. Maybe he keeps kosher and the house elves have to make him like special meals or something like that. We don't know any of that. We do get somewhat of a different perspective, not really, but with Parvati and Padma, at least in their dress robes for the Yule Ball, they tend to show some of their cultural and religious practices through that.
Yeah.
But I also don't think that, well, A, it wasn't enough, and B, it wasn't very descriptive. So,
and you don't really get the idea.
And it obviously wasn't actual
you don't really get the idea she consulted someone from another culture to see how to frame that properly. She's just kind of like, this is what I see brown girls wearing. So this is what I'm going to write down. Yeah.
And it was a very artificial rendering of it too, because it doesn't have anything to do with the religious substance or why they might be wearing that or anything. It's just, this is what they're wearing because they're Indian and they celebrate a different religion, and this is what I know. Very limited knowledge about their possible culture.
Oh, I mean, they're Indian. This is a formal occasion. Of course, they're gonna
Yeah.
wear a sari. Come on,
Yeah,
guys.
exactly. So I do really think that a lot of it has to just do with convenience and
Yes.
laziness, because diversity and representation require research, they require internal thought, they require, you know, empathy, and a lot of these things I think she was just either lacking or not willing to put the work in
Yes.
for. So
Yeah, no, I think that probably is what happened. But actually, like, I can kind of see, like, on the flip side, in a way, the wizarding world kind of makes sense to me as like something that could easily be like a religious minority community. Like they have their own language and cuisine and clothing and all these things that make so much sense to them, and like everyone in the community can just like throw these terms out. Like yeah, like we were saying before about Kiddush and Hamotzi, and then yeah, like we've got to like kind of explain what that means to other people because like not everyone might know, but then like in our own communities we would just be using these terms all the time. But yeah, and just like it makes so much sense to us, but yeah, to someone outside the community you might have to like stop and explain it, or
mhm.
they might even just be unsure like why on earth are you are you doing that kind of thing. Yeah, I did choose a deep dive quote for the politics of cultural Christianity because I remember you used to do that in the early episodes, and I came across this, and it was just like,
Yeah.
so it's in the Goblet of Fire. It's in chapter 4, Back to the Burrow, and so we're just waiting for the Weasleys to come to get Harry from Privet Drive to go to the Quidditch World Cup, and Mr. Dursley is very worried about these wizards turning up and being weird, and he says, "I hope you've told them to dress properly, these people." He snarled. "I've seen that sort of stuff you lot wear. They'd better have the decency to put on normal clothes, that's all." Like that was just so great because I think that clothing is such a powerful indicator of culture, and people like kind of
Mhm.
saying before like the people whose culture is like their like the dominant culture, like I guess like those white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who get to experience their culture as just the norm and as being universal, kind of have the power to describe
Yeah.
some clothing as normal and some not. So like for example, like my hair is covered right now. To me that's part of like yes, I spoke to one girl who was engaged. Actually, she described it as like her married uniform, because like like many Jewish women choose to cover their hair after we get married, and like to me now it would be really weird to not cover it, but to someone else they might be like, well, that's not normal, like the default is that you don't cover your hair, right? But like who gets to decide what these defaults are?
Yeah, definitely. I know that there are the reactions I see of people who are not familiar with Judaism or the cultural practices or anything like that when they go to a highly Jewish community in their area and they see men walking around with their hats and their payas and their talis,
Hmm.
like they're like, oh, that's a Jew, I can tell. It's clothing is very stark indicator of
Yes.
different beliefs in some forms, and being obviously it's the first thing you see about a person, so being judgmental about someone just based on what they're wearing and taking making snap judgments about what kind of person they are or what their morals may be, or what kind of how they would react to situations just based off of their clothes, is definitely prejudice in
That's
some
very
way.
true. Yeah, I guess like
So
that reminds me as well. Like my sister went to an audition for Fiddler on the Roof, just like a community production, and and she saw like these people getting into their costumes to be like I don't know, to be these different characters from the shtetl, and one of them was saying to like one of the others like, oh, okay, so now I've dressed up as this and this and this and a Hasidic Jew. I've never dressed up as a Hasidic Jew before. And then someone else was saying to him like, oh well, you can go and observe them in like Golders Green, and like naming like these other Jewish places in England, and just like almost like it is literally a costume that you can put on or that you can go and observe. Like you can dress up as like a butterfly, or you can go and look at actual butterflies, like reducing the
mhm.
clothing of other cultures to the same level.
Well, this has been a really illuminating conversation, and I hope you guys don't feel like I have been using you to like teach me about cultural Judaism.
No, it's all
No,
no,
I
this
think
has
it's
been
something
great.
that is good to talk about.
I don't think we get to talk about enough about things that are a little bit more I guess like not as obvious as like what color is your skin tone or like what are you wearing rather than like what do you believe in and how does it differ from like what society has deemed as like the
Mhm.
norm, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a unique what's the word, group to be a part of, because being white and Jewish, you pass as just like, not different than anyone around you every day. And then something happens where you feel it makes it very obvious that you're a minority in the eyes of these people.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't really, outside sources don't really seem to understand or believe you when you express these, because, oh, you look Christian, you look like you could celebrate Christmas, you don't look like any different than this guy over here, or my friends who celebrate Christmas and go to church. So you must not have any issues with being discriminated against with your religion. And it's like, well, no, you don't. You just because you can't tell just by looking at me that I'm Jewish does not mean that there aren't things that I go through that are different than the standard person on the street. So
I think there's also an argument. Sorry, I think there's also an argument about like, well, at least, people can choose, the religion, but they can't choose their skin tone, which, like, on the one hand, valid, right? But on the other hand, is also kind of diminishing the experience of like a religious practice or belonging to even just like a cultural group.
yeah, and
It's just
I would say
diminishing
that with
that.
Judaism, it's not even just a religion
No.
either, because it is a lifestyle, it's a culture, it like
Yeah.
exactly.
That's what I meant by
Yeah,
cultural
so like
practice. Yeah,
changing
also.
your religion just because like I don't have to be Jewish, I mean, doesn't mean make me any less of like a lifetime Jew, because I could easily go convert to Christianity, which I A would never want to do, but B like would not change the cultural surroundings that I was brought up in, or my family or the traditions or anything like that. So you can change your religion, but you can't change your culture, if that makes sense.
Well, I think that goes into the nuances of passing, Helene, which we kind of have touched on a little bit. And I can kind of relate as being someone who can sometimes pass in certain environments as white. But I can't change my culture. Like, I can't change the fact that I was born and raised in a colony, or that, in the Caribbean, and that I have a very different culture, different set of pop culture references, different set of knowledge. My first language is Spanish, and like that's going to come out eventually. So, like, passing is a kind of privilege that is limited, right? Like, it has a timestamp. Like, there will be a time where you will be found out, and then you still have that threat hanging over your head of like what will happen if people find out if you are in fact trying to pass. And I have family members who are like that, but like the reason I don't want to pass, quote unquote, is because I'd rather know upfront like what I'm
Right.
dealing with, and who I'm dealing with. But that doesn't mean that other people don't pass or choose to pass for their own safety or because they feel safer that
Yeah,
way.
definitely.
Yeah.
I think passing is sometimes like feels like the most accurate way like that I would describe myself as well. Like there's quite a lot of debate at the moment. If you're European, many Jewish people are people of color as well. But like if you're like of European descent, like should you identify as white or should you not? Because we do still experience prejudice. But I think first of all, it's not just about religion and culture. Like many anti-Semites would hate you for having Jewish blood. So it is also about ethnicity as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the other thing is like, okay, like you could, as you say, like just completely pretend to not be Jewish, and see if you can get white privilege that way, but having to change like every aspect of your life and identity as a calculated move to get white privilege is not white privilege as a white person experiences it.
Yeah.
Like, a white person just gets white
That's
privilege. That's why
very
it's
true.
privilege.
No, you're denying you're denying your own personhood in service of
Yes,
white
exactly.
supremacy.
And
Right.
that's not,
And it's not it's in service. Yeah, and it's in service of white supremacy not to gain power. It's in service of white supremacy to
Mhm.
survive. So that's just a different set of calculations, which I mean, at the end of the day, I don't judge anyone who chooses
Mhm.
to pass because that is their choice and the choice they've had to make to survive. But also, like, the bigger problem here is not like the problem here is not
Mhm.
people who pass, right? The problem here is the people who
The people
uphold
who,
white
yeah, the
supremacist
people who
structures.
make those people feel like they need to pass.
Yes.
Yeah, the ones that.
Uh-huh, who force people into passing or in marginalized people who don't look and
Mhm.
act like
Mhm.
them, period. So, like, white supremacy is more than just the color of the skin, as we've kind of discussed here. Like, it's a set of cultural beliefs. It's a set of religious beliefs, even, and a and also like it's beyond
Yeah.
race. It's the normalization of Christianity as the end all and be all, and the use and weaponization of Christianity to wage a war against marginalized
Yeah, that's
groups.
interesting. Yeah, that we brought Christianity back into it. I think something that I was reading that was quite interesting when I was looking up the debate about like whether, as yeah, a like Polish descended Jew, I should count myself as white. And it was saying like there's actually the real answer. Like, yes, yeah, I find white passing to be the most helpful answer in practical terms. But the real answer is that there is no answer because the notion of being white versus being a person of color is based on a view of history which is a correct view, but no view of history is correct enough to encompass every single person and culture or every single event and pattern of events. And the view of history this is really based on is the Christian European like power structure of like westernization that of colonization essentially, which was white Christian people hoping to bring whiteness and
Mhm.
Christianity to all the countries that they could and spreading that message. And that's kind of was part of how of how like Spain I think you were saying you obviously know a lot more about it than me, but like Spain colonized Puerto Rico and like a lot of South American countries. Tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but like part of that was part of that was money, part of it was wanting to teach Christianity to these people because they believed that Christianity was right and needed to be taught to everyone, right?
Yeah, so the original part was like, let's find spices. And then they did really bad calculations that ended up in the Americas. And then they were like, oh my God, there's gold in the
Mm.
Americas. Who knew? So let's just bring in all our ships to the Americas. And like these indigenous people are like super
Mm.
nice and super like uncouth, right? But like we can
Right.
civilize them. And that's where
Yes.
religion comes in, right? Like
Yes.
Catholicism. So they went in, and Spain specifically was very Catholic, and they colonized the quote unquote New World using not just they wanted the richest, but they also wanted to quote unquote civilize these natives through religion. And then they brought in slaves like every colonizer does from Africa and from the continent of Africa. And then the you know the British Empire colonizes different parts of America and brings Protestantism into it in the same way the Spanish brought Catholicism. Yeah, and then the Portuguese colonized Brazil, I believe, and then the French also colonized parts of the New World, like what is New Orleans was French, I believe.
Yes, exactly. It was this idea of civilizing people of color through the Christian through spreading Christianity. Right? I used to also really like when I was growing up the Laura Ingalls Wilder books. And like it's kind of a shame like those books kind of have like a special place for me, but I also am realizing how like deeply like insurmountably problematic it is because the whole idea is this family, this white Christian family, kind of traveling west across America and like colonizing more and more of the American countryside and just taking it from the Native Americans who are like referred to throughout the series as the Indians. And they really had this idea that they were doing such a good job, like this is great, God is so happy with us because we're just going through this whole country and just spreading Christianity. As you say, these people were Protestants who would have come, I guess, from the British Empire originally. And so they're like the whole idea of like colonization and and like taming these people of color that they found in other countries. So like the idea of like whiteness as a political, as something political, and the idea of Christianity are kind of inextricably linked in a way. Like, if you are descended from like a religion that was around while that was happening and is not Christianity, then you kind of don't fit in that equation, because that's like, where the whole idea of being white versus being a person of color actually comes from. And so like, if you're from another, if you're from another religion, then there's no place for you in that story. You're actually something separate from that. So I guess like that's kind of how I started to see it, as like, well, that's the real answer to the question, but in practical terms, the easiest thing for me is to say I'm white passing, because that kind of enables me to understand how I can have elements of white privilege and how that can play out in my life, but I also do still experience racism.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard question because people want to define race as this like end all and be all without taking into account cultural practices that may single us out as other, because we are treated as other by
Mm-hmm.
a lot of quote unquote like mainstream um, people who follow maybe secular Christianity.
Yeah.
Um, and also not who people who do not understand that the experience of everyone in this country is
Right.
not Christian, or is not centered around whiteness, or is not centered around American culture. Like some of us still listen to Spanish music, you know what I mean, like, or watch Spanish TV shows or whatever and don't need subtitles. The the idea of
Mm-hmm.
just your own centering people's views on what is American or British or what have you into what most people do, and ignoring the plights of people of color, indigenous people and black people, that's what got us in the mess, you know. Well, this has been great. I think we're done for today. Unless
Well,
either
we
of
do
you
need
have
to. I don't know
anything
if we're
else
going to
to
talk
add.
about the media we've been consuming, but we do need to do our based on our emails. We need to do our sorting ceremony of the Brooklyn Nine-Nine characters.
Oh, we still have to do that. Yes. Oh my gosh, I forgot about this. Okay, let's do a quick sort of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Okay. Helene, do you watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine? I forgot.
I don't.
Okay, so you're excluded from this conversation.
Okay, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
we
I think he
we
has
are
to be a
sidelining
Gryffindor.
you, Helene. Um,
Yeah.
all right. So Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Uh, Jake Peralta is obviously like the first person I think of. Who do you like? Which house
I think
do
last
you
time you
think?
said Hufflepuff when you did this with your
Mm-hmm,
husband
mm-hmm.
on the podcast. But there's this one quote at the beginning where they're describing all the characters, and they say, Jake Peralta is the best detective. He loves putting away bad guys, and he loves solving puzzles. The only puzzle he never solved is how to grow up. Apart from there being a little bit of Ravenclaw in there with the puzzles, I don't think you can get much more Gryffindor than that.
Never grow up. I can see that. I myself as well. Amy Santiago definitely. Amy Santiago definitely a Ravenclaw in my book,
Yeah, she's actually the hardest one for me.
with
I'm not sure.
hints of Gryffindor.
I can see her like her ambition and her like work ethic and her book smarts and her courage all kind of rolled into one. They're like inextricable for her. They're just they're like it all kind of plays into just like her love of her work and like her real determination to do well. So I actually found her the hardest one. I kind of tentatively went with Gryffindor just because I couldn't decide, and like at least in canon, like Harry Potter canon, most people end up with someone from their own house, so that's kind of what I thought. I can definitely see Ravenclaw as well. Like, she definitely likes learning things.
Okay, so Helene,
Yeah.
just so you understand, Helene. So Amy Santiago is like the Hermione of the group,
She does say she's
and
Hermione.
then Jake Peralta is like and then like Jake Peralta is
Okay.
basically if you
I mean,
mix Ron and
I've seen the
Harry
very
together.
first episode, and that's it. And
So
I will say from what Shoshana is saying,
Well,
like
there's
the way
character
that she
development
described
from
her,
there
she
on.
sounds more like Slytherin to me.
She's very type A. Yeah, there's actually one
No,
part where
the ambition is not about like gaining power or anything.
yeah, I think
She has like binders.
I think she is because she describes
It's
herself
like
as
very
Hermione as well. There's like one
Hermione-like.
part they go into this like into like a wedding venue that we're looking at. I'm not saying who Amy is going to marry, but she does go to a wedding venue at one point, and and she says like, oh, this looks like Hogwarts Castle. I'm Hermione. And it's kind of like funny because like she clearly is Hermione, so I guess she would be a Gryffindor Ravenclaw house doll.
Charles would be maybe a little bit Hufflepuff, a little bit Gryffindor.
And you're saying because he's a good friend?
No, because the way that he just cares about people's feelings so much.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of thought about putting Charles in Ravenclaw first because I think out of the group he's the one who's interested in things that don't have practical value but are interesting on another level, kind of beyond that. So he doesn't just want to eat food like whatever nourishes him. He wants to really learn about the cookery of other cultures. Like he takes his son to like a cartoon drawing class, which again isn't a practical value, but it's something a bit quirky that's really good for his son's creativity and development. Like he's really the one who's interested in things beyond like on the surface what their worth is, which I think is kind of a Ravenclaw trait. And he's also the weird one in the group, which is often a sign that you're dealing with a Ravenclaw. But that said, I think it does describe him as like the one who is the one who is like who's known for his hard work more than his talent. So in that sense he could be a Hufflepuff. I don't know.
Well, I think you've convinced me he's a Ravenclaw. But I just feel like he's so sensitive to other people's feelings and he wants everyone to be happy and he wants to be included in everything. And he could be a
Yeah.
Ravenclaw.
I was questioning the empathy
Captain
and
Holt.
kindness.
He can be a Ravenclaw.
Captain Holt is a Hufflepuff. I know it's controversial, but actually for me it perfectly fits. Like he doesn't fit the stereotypes of a Hufflepuff, but he has all their traits like very strongly. Like Haley, you'll seen this if you watch the first episode, right? Because like what he values most of all is being included in the team, and he has experience being excluded, and that's the one thing that he really doesn't want to happen. He's very loyal. Like how many times
Is he the one the first gay black captain?
Yes.
That
okay.
one. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so he really wants to be included in the team.
Yeah, he could be a Hufflepuff.
So he's very loyal. So like how many times has the show tried to separate him from his squad and he always comes back because he just loves them. And I have a lot of love for that character. And he's also shown a lot of loyalty to Kevin. They've stayed together through a lot of prejudice and turmoil. And he's very hardworking. So I think I definitely think that he's actually probably the clearest one to me, I think. And I can imagine him saying it in his voice as well.
Then,
yes. Yeah, sorry, you're my officially designated Hogwarts
it could be like with his monotone voice, Hufflepuff.
Yeah.
Like
Hufflepuff. Yeah.
Gina would definitely be a Slytherin in my book.
Oh yeah. He's like the hat barely touches the head. Slytherin. It should be one of those. Yeah.
So is Rosa actually for me.
Oh, okay. Just because she. Yeah, like why is that?
So Rosa is like no nonsense, ambitious, doesn't care as much like about people's like I don't know I don't want to say she's insensitive to people's feelings, but she kind of is. And she's like, I'm tough.
She prides herself on it.
Don't mess with me. Don't talk to me about it. And then Terry to me is either a Gryffindor or a Hufflepuff.
Rosa to me was a Ravenclaw, but for a similar reason why you said she was a Slytherin, because to me it's like she kind of prides herself on following her head, not her heart, I think. And that's very important for her. I think also what I get, like, you don't really find out what she loves about her work, but I get the impression that like she loves the fact that it really uses her skills, both physical and analytical. and that seems to be what she really values the most. So to me that seemed to be like her. She obviously doesn't want us to know a lot about her, so I'm not surprised that we don't agree on this sorting. But if I was the sorting hat and I was like trying to peer like the most into her mind, I think it seems what I would find is that what she cares about the most is following her head, not her heart, and being able to really exercise her skills. So there's that. And then Terry, actually, I really like the idea of Terry as a Gryffindor. I think, like, he does have a lot of courage in the way that he's so unashamedly himself, I guess. Because, he really, he really presents as, like, kind of this tough, strong man. And he's, like, unashamed to show that side of him, but then also to be the one who really cares about the squad and is, like, looking out for all of his team. And also to be, to really, really care about his family as well. So I can see it like a Hufflepuff because I guess he's just that stereotypical like softie in a way. But no, I really like the idea of him as a Gryffindor because I think it does take courage, and just like how he really pushes himself, like at the beginning when he's like scared to go back into the field because what if he gets hurt and who will take care of the babies and everything. But then like he really pushes himself to overcome that. And
Wait,
sorry.
is Terry Cruz's character? They just named his character
He's
after
also Terry.
the actor?
Yes.
That
Correct.
seems like lazy writing.
They might have
could be a
cast.
coincidence.
I think they cast him and Andy Samberg first, and built the cast around them both.
Huh?
Okay.
I didn't know that.
Well,
but do you know the story?
I mean, that's usually how these projects are. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Do you know the story of like there was because obviously there's two Latina characters, like main characters, and
Yes.
like so they apparently those two actresses like knew each other first, and then one of them when she found out her friend got the part, she was like kind of really happy but also sad because she was like, oh, they're not going to cast me now, they wouldn't have two Latina characters, and then they did. So like that made me really happy because it decided
Rosa was supposed to be Irish.
Really?
So Rosa was written as Irish, and they just changed the script. I mean, they changed the scripts. They did kind of a little bit like almost like a colorblind casting, kind of like Hamilton did. But also they just were completely okay with changing, the script around the people they cast and their ethnicity. And really, they didn't have to do much.
Okay, yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I didn't know that, but I'm very excited for like they're doing like this rewrite thing at the moment because they had like one series that was ready to go before obviously there was Black Lives Matter and everything. And then they were like, oh shoot, like we can't do this police precinct situation and just like carry on like nothing's happened. We're gonna have to rewrite this whole series. So apparently I think that is coming out pretty soon, maybe in March or something like that. And I'm just like really excited because kind of like how I was saying at the beginning with like the power of storytelling, I really do think that Brooklyn Nine-Nine has like the potential to be like a real net positive in representation and stuff like that. And like they're like it seems to me they are really committed to doing representation properly, and and kind of like giving people a lot of kind of chances to be represented properly that might not have had them before, but obviously they can't now just continue doing the police precinct story like nothing's happened. So I'm really excited to see what they're going to do, because I really do think that this kind of storytelling can have a really positive impact on the world.
Well, on that note, I think we are done with this episode. So that's it. And you can join us next week for a brand new episode. And we are going to be talking about Chapter 22 of Order of the Phoenix.
If you've enjoyed this conversation, take a second to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now.
Until then, politics managed. Support this show by going to patreon.com/Akiopolitics. Our patrons keep this show going. You can find us online at akiopolitics.com, and we are at Akiopolitics on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can email us your thoughts at info@akiopolitics.com. Leave us a voicemail at 915-996-1699, and you might just hear yourself on the podcast. Adriana Wilson is the founder and creative director of the podcast. Helene Karp is the producer and social media manager. Allison Pullman is the audio wizard and editor who makes us sound so good. Cover art and physical rewards are designed by Adriana Wilson. The views expressed by the hosts and guests are expressly their own and not representative of their employers or associates. Akiopolitics is part of the MuggleNet family of podcasts.